Hello, my name is Michaela Parker, and today I will be teaching about an important issue at the intersection of law and psychology: competence to exercise the right to remain silent. Most of us are familiar with the phrase, you have the right to remain silent, from television or movies, but in reality, this right is deeply rooted in the U.S. Constitution under the Fifth Amendment, which protects individuals from being forced to incriminate themselves. The Supreme Court case Miranda versus Arizona in 1966 made it clear that people must be informed of this right when they are taken into custody. However, the question is not whether people are told their rights, but whether they actually understand them. Some individuals may repeat these words, but don't fully grasp their meaning or consequences. This is where the concept competence comes in. Courts and psychologists must determine if a person is truly capable of exercising or waiving this right. The legal standard for waiver. In order for someone to give up their right to remain silent, the waiver must meet three legal requirements. First, it must be knowing. The person has to understand what the right is, that they do not have to talk to police, and that silence cannot be used against them in court. Second, it must be intelligent. This means the person appreciates the consequences of giving up the right, such as their words can later be used in trial. And third, it must be voluntary. The decision has to be made freely without coercion, threats, or promises. This framework sounds pretty straightforward, but in practice, it is not always easy to determine whether someone's waiver is truly valid. Psychological factors and competence. Forensic psychology has identified several dimensions of competence that courts often look at. The first is understanding. Does the person comprehend what the right to remain silent actually means? The second is appreciation. Do they recognize how waiving the right could impact their case? The third is reasoning. Are they able to weigh their choices and make rational decision about whether or not to talk? And the fourth, expression of choice. Can they clearly communicate that choice to police officers? If any of these areas are impaired due to age, intellectual ability, or mental illness, the validity of the waiver is questionable. Who are the vulnerable populations? Certain groups are especially vulnerable when it comes to waiving their rights. Juveniles are at high risk. Research shows that many minors waive their rights quickly, often because they feel intimidated or want to please authority figures. They may not understand the long term consequences of speaking without a lawyer present. Individuals with intellectual disabilities may struggle to understand abstract legal rights. Even if they can repeat the words of the Miranda warning, they may not fully grasp the understanding of anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. People with mental illnesses can also face challenges as well. For example, individuals experiencing psychosis or severe mood disorders may not be thinking clearly, making it difficult to make rational decisions about waiving rights. These populations remind us why competence assessments are so important. Without them, the justice system risks unfairly convicting people who never understood their rights in the first place. The role of psychological evaluations. Forensic psychologists are often asked to evaluate whether a person was competent when they waived their rights. These evaluations typically involve clinical interviews to assess mental state and ability to understand, cognitive testing to measure intellectual functioning and comprehension, and specialized instruments such as Miranda Rights comprehension scales, which test whether someone can truly explain the rights in their own words. The the psychologist's role is not to decide whether the individual is guilty or innocent, but to inform the court whether the person's waiver was valid. Their work ensures that any confession introduced to the court is reliable and legally obtained. There are real cases where confessions may have been excluded because of the defendant was not competent. For instance, courts have sometimes ruled that very young teens or people with significant intellectual disabilities could not make a knowing and intelligent waiver. In these cases, even if a person confessed, the confession could not be used in trial because it violated constitutional protections. These cases highlight the balance courts must strike between effective law enforcement and the protection of individual rights. Implications for the justice system. Ensuring competence to exercise the right to remain silent protects fairness in the legal system. It prevents coerced and uninformed confessions, which could lead to wrongful convictions. It also reinforces the idea that constitutional rights are not just words on paper, they are real protections that must be respected in practice. Psychologists play a vital role in bridging law and mental health, making sure vulnerable individuals are not taken advantage of and the justice is served fairly. In conclusion, competence to exercise the right to remain silent is a critical safeguard in our justice system. A waiver must be knowing, intelligent, and voluntary. And psychologists help courts determine whether these conditions are met. Vulnerable populations such as juveniles, individuals with intellectual disabilities, and those with mental illnesses require special attention to ensure their rights are not violated. Protecting competence is ultimately about protecting fairness. It ensures that people are not punished for rights they never truly understood, and it helps maintain the integrity of justice system. Should vulnerable groups like juveniles or individuals with intellectual disabilities be allowed to waive their rights to remain silent without a lawyer present?